Today, a major announcement from Burkina Faso has caught the attention of the world. President Ibrahim Traoré made a bold move that has shaken the global financial system. This morning, at the government palace in Ouagadougou, an emergency cabinet meeting was called. But what happened next surprised everyone. The young president revealed the findings of a special audit team that had been quietly working inside the Ministry of Finance for weeks. Their investigation focused on Burkina Faso's decades-long relationship with the World Bank. What they discovered was deeply troubling. According to their report, since 1960, Burkina Faso has paid back 15 times more than it originally borrowed, mostly in interest. Even more shocking, many of the loans were linked to projects like roads, hospitals, and schools that never actually existed. These projects were only on paper, yet payments were made and debts kept growing. Digging deeper, the team found secret agreements between World Bank officials and past leaders. These documents showed evidence of corruption, hidden deals, and even a 2019 agreement that gave away 40% of the country's gold reserves as loan collateral, without the knowledge of Parliament or the public. Audit Chairman Professor Amadou Sawadogo called it a carefully planned economic exploitation of our people. When President Traoré read the documents, he was furious. He immediately summoned James Morrison, the World Bank's regional director for West Africa, to the palace. Morrison arrived later that day, unaware of what was coming. In a highly secure meeting, President Traoré laid the documents on the table and spoke directly. "Mr. Morrison, we have proof. You've taken billions from our country through fake loans and imaginary projects. Our official debt is $4 billion, but we've paid $23 billion. That ends now." When Morrison tried to respond, Traoré interrupted him. "Don't talk about procedures. This is theft, planned and organized. You have 24 hours. Cancel these debts and return the money, or I'll have you and your team arrested for economic crimes." Morrison claimed diplomatic immunity, but President Traoré dismissed it, saying, "There is no immunity for economic exploitation. We have the evidence. Our courts will decide your fate." After the tense meeting, President Traoré addressed the nation and the global media from the palace garden, standing in front of the Burkina Faso flag and a portrait of national hero Thomas Sankara. His words were powerful and clear. To my brothers and sisters in Burkina Faso and across Africa, the time for silence is over. We are reclaiming what belongs to us. Historic day in Africa. President Traoré's bold stand against decades of exploitation. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso continued making headlines today with a powerful message. This is a historic moment, not just for Burkina Faso, but for all African nations. For 50 years, we were lied to. Our resources were taken, our people misled. That ends today. Africa's wealth belongs to Africans. During a live press briefing, he displayed confidential documents showing hidden deals, bribery receipts, and secret bank transactions involving past leaders and World Bank officials. Journalists were stunned. Soon after, thousands took to the streets of Ouagadougou. Massive crowds gathered outside the World Bank office chanting, "We want our money back!" University students waved signs in support of Traoré. Women joined in, banging pots and pans in protest. Online, the hashtag #TakeBackAfrica began trending globally. Support poured in from across the African continent. Mali's President Assimi Goïta said, "Burkina Faso is not alone. We've faced the same exploitation. Now is the time to act together." Niger's leader Abdourahmane Tiani called on all Sahel countries to review their ties with the World Bank. Traoré's bravery should inspire us all. Africa is waking up. Guinea's President Mamadi Doumbouya added, "Traoré is setting the right example. We will take similar action soon. African resources must be in African hands." Even Uganda's long-serving leader, Yoweri Museveni, expressed support. What Traoré did we should have done decades ago. It's late, but it's the right step. The news caused concern at the World Bank's Washington headquarters. President Ajay Banga called an emergency meeting with regional directors. The growing risk of other African nations following Burkina Faso's lead alarmed them. IMF Chief Kristalina Georgieva urged calm and moderation, but many Africans saw her words as patronizing and out of touch. France acted quickly, sending an urgent diplomatic team to Burkina Faso. But Traoré refused to meet them. His message was firm. First, we resolve the World Bank issue, then we'll deal with you. The US State Department also released a statement urging Burkina Faso to respect international norms. African analysts pushed back, calling these norms neo-colonial rules that favored global powers. In a surprising twist, James Morrison, the World Bank's West Africa director, tried to quietly leave the country. But security forces at the airport stopped him. His passport was seized, and he was taken back to the palace under guard. Meanwhile, international reactions intensified. China released a statement saying every nation has the right to economic independence. The China Development Bank even offered interest-free loans to Burkina Faso, something that didn't sit well with the West. Russia's response was the strongest yet. The Kremlin called the World Bank's actions in Africa neo-colonialism. President Putin's spokesman said, "We support Traoré's courage. African people deserve to control their own future." By evening, a major leak hit social media. Private emails and secret memos from the World Bank began to circulate, raising even more questions about how deep this problem goes. African awakening. Traoré takes unprecedented action. Late last night, a major leak took social media by storm. Internal documents from the World Bank revealed what many had long suspected. African nations were being systematically kept in debt. One document titled "Strategy to Keep Poor Countries in Debt Forever" went viral. It detailed how past African leaders were bribed, which banks handled those bribes, how media coverage was controlled, and how dissenting voices were silenced. The public reaction was one of shock and anger. In response, Burkina Faso's security forces quickly sealed all World Bank offices in Ouagadougou. Safes were seized, and important documents were handed over to the prosecutor's office. President Traoré announced that these materials would be used in court. At the same time, the African Union held an emergency meeting in Addis Ababa. Out of 53 member nations, 41 expressed their support for President Traoré. A special committee was formed to review Africa's relationship with the World Bank. The head of the African Development Bank also weighed in, urging the continent to create its own financial system. Back in Ouagadougou, thousands of people stayed out all night. A candlelight vigil was held in front of the World Bank building. People chanted, "We won't let Morrison escape." Posters of Traoré appeared on every corner. Graffiti reading, "Our hero leader," covered the walls. Bonfires lit up the streets, especially around the universities, while African news outlets reported on the people's rising hope. Western media took a different tone. CNN International called Traoré a populist. BBC claimed economic disaster is looming. The Financial Times ran the headline, "Burkina Faso commits economic suicide." But on the ground in Africa, the message was clear. This was not a collapse. It was a rebirth. As the 24-hour deadline, President Traoré gave James Morrison approached, rumors spread. Some sources in Washington said the World Bank might back down. Others warned of possible sanctions against Burkina Faso. At sunrise, all eyes turned to the palace. James Morrison, visibly nervous, was brought in. This time cameras were allowed. Indeed, the whole world watched as he faced the president. Morrison spoke first. Headquarters agreed. "We can restructure the debt, cut it by 50%. President Traoré didn't hesitate. "I don't want restructuring. I want cancellation. And I want the return of the $23 billion you took. Morrison went pale. That's impossible. The World Bank doesn't have that authority. Then came the moment that made history. President Traoré stood up and said, "Then, you're under arrest, Mr. Morrison. You will face trial for economic crimes." Security officers stepped forward and handcuffed Morrison. For the first time in history, a World Bank official was arrested. As Morrison shouted, "I have diplomatic immunity," Traoré replied coldly, "There's no immunity for economic exploitation, Morrison." And 5 of his colleagues were taken to Ouagadougou Central Prison. The images spread fast. Global markets reacted immediately. World Bank shares dropped by 12%. Western banks working in Africa went into emergency mode. At noon, Traoré spoke again, this time to over 100,000 people gathered in Thomas Sankara Square. "My brothers and sisters, today we claim our real independence. Our gold, our uranium, everything belongs to us, and we will use it for the good of our people." The crowd erupted. Traditional dances performed, elders prayed with tears in their eyes, and slogans like "Long live independent Burkina Faso" echoed through the city. Messages of support poured in from all over Africa, and the movement didn't stop there. In Ivory Coast, young people took to the streets. In Ghana, students organized marches. In country after country, leaders and citizens began questioning their own ties to global financial institutions. President Traoré's bold actions had triggered a domino effect. Africa, it seemed, was finally standing up, not just for Burkina Faso, but for an entire continent's future. The world reacts. A new era begins in Africa. President Traoré's bold actions have sparked a global conversation. For the first time in decades, the old financial systems from the colonial era are being openly questioned. Across Africa, young leaders are gaining confidence, and ordinary people are demanding what's rightfully theirs. The World Bank has never faced pressure like this before. The arrest of its West Africa director, James Morrison, sent shockwaves through the institution. Experts now say that if other African nations follow Burkina Faso's lead, the World Bank's entire role on the continent could come to an end. Traoré, despite being young, has quickly become a symbol of strength and hope, not just in Burkina Faso, but for oppressed nations worldwide. His courage has inspired millions. People now believe that the balance of global power is starting to shift, and Traoré is at the center of that change. Questions now fill the air. Will the World Bank give in? Will Morrison be tried in court? Will other African nations follow Traoré's example? Answers will come in the days ahead, but one thing is already clear. Something big is changing. Global support grows. Countries in the BRICS alliance quickly voiced their support. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, "We support Africa's just and fair struggle." Brazil's President Lula da Silva called for unity against exploitation. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa even invited Traoré to Pretoria. Even within Europe, opinions are shifting. Lawmakers in Spain and Portugal demanded a review of the World Bank's activities in Africa. In Italy, a group of senators wrote a public letter backing Traoré. Germany's Left Party declared, "We stand with Africa's legitimate demands." Celebration across Burkina Faso. Back home, the people of Burkina Faso are celebrating. In schools, children are drawing pictures of President Traoré. At markets, vendors are proudly shouting, "We kicked out the World Bank." Churches and mosques held special prayers, and many elderly citizens said, "We haven't seen a leader like this since Thomas Sankara." Viral moment of history. The footage of Morrison's arrest quickly went viral. While most Western outlets avoided showing it, clips of Morrison being escorted in handcuffs were shared millions of times online. Young Africans across the continent declared, We are witnessing history. More countries join in support continued to grow. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro offered Burkina Faso discounted oil, saying the Bolivarian revolution is now reaching Africa. Cuba promised to send doctors and teachers. Iran praised what it called a growing movement for justice and sovereignty. Tension. Inside the World Bank. Meanwhile, fear spread among World Bank staff working in Africa. In Kenya, security was increased in Nigeria. Staff began using their vacation days. The regional office in Ethiopia suspended operations entirely. Markets responded too. World Bank-linked investments dropped and gold prices soared. Analysts even coined a new phrase, the Traoré effect. More. Evidence uncovered. Burkinabe intelligence found even more files on Morrison's computer. 10 years of emails showing how bribes were paid, how coups were supported, and how interference was planned. President Traoré announced that these documents would be submitted to the International Court of Justice. The African diaspora responds in France. African communities rallied in support. In Paris and Lyon, thousands of people marched, including students who held vigils outside embassies and consulates. Even in the US, voices of support emerged. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, "The World Bank must be reformed." Senator Bernie Sanders added, "The African people have every right to demand justice." Even Republican Senator Rand Paul said, "We must rethink our foreign aid policies." Support from the people of Turkey, while Turkish officials made cautious statements. Ordinary citizens were vocal. Turkish social media platforms were filled with messages praising President Traoré and celebrating Africa's rising voice. As events in Burkina Faso continued to unfold, conversations also began in Turkey. With its deep historical ties to Africa, many suggested that Turkey should take a more active role in supporting the continent's future. In Asia, governments in Japan and South Korea remained quiet, but independent African affairs experts from both countries voiced strong opinions. Professor Yamamoto from Tokyo University said, "This may be the beginning of Africa's renewal." Dr. Akim Park from Seoul noted, "We could be witnessing the start of a new global balance of power." National pride in Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, there was a strong feeling of unity and celebration. The military stood firmly behind President Traoré. Senior generals publicly declared their loyalty and pride in the young leader. Fighter jets flew over the capital in a show of national strength and confidence. Citizens cheered for the army, and the bond between the people and the military grew stronger than ever. One thing is now clear: Africa has changed. The events led by President Traoré are likely to inspire a new generation of leaders across the continent. The systems of financial dependence and exploitation are being challenged. African countries are now moving toward a future where they can manage their own resources and define their own path to prosperity. And at the heart of this movement stands one name: Ibrahim Traoré, who will be remembered as a courageous leader who dared to take the first step.